Hey everyone, welcome to America's Mom. And today we have an incredible special guest with us today, all the way from the UK. She is spending her evening with us here in America, in Colorado. That is Miss Posie Parker. She is a women's and children's advocate, more than an advocate. She's a massive activist who has made the mistake of publicly stating that women are women and men are men and men cannot become women. And she is going to be joining us here in just a moment on America's Mom. I am so stinking excited because it's not every day. It is not every day you get to have a woman so visionary, so strong. You know, she was enjoying her life. She's a mother of 4 children, happily married. She was enjoying her life, doing her thing, and then realized that there was this thing happening. Women's sports were being invaded.
Yes, she is. The camera of UK. Oh, I am so excited to have you on here today. See, it happens. Thank you for your great.
It's so easy.
Yeah, it was so easy. Oh my gosh. So, Miss Posie Parker, welcome to Colorado. I am so excited for everybody to meet you and hear from you. There is so much for you to share with us. First of all, I just kind of want to highlight you are a mom.
I am, yes, of 4.
Of 4 and married forever.
Married forever, been together 21 years this month.
Awesome, awesome. Same here, same here. And so tell me why in the world you decided to be a women's and children's activist. Just take us back to the beginning. What happened? Why have you been barred from Twitter, interrogated by the police twice, brought on shows to be hostily grilled by the media over and over and over? What happened? Tell us about this.
So I'm a former lefty. So back in 2015, the Conservative Party were elected outright in the UK, and part of that was a little bit of disgruntled feelings amongst lefty women, and so I joined this group. And long story short, it was supposed to be a women's group, and I'd never really heard of some of the issues before, and I was attacked quite venomously because I asked a man who looked like a trucker if he really was a woman. And it was honestly, like I'd said, I'd like to murder your family, because it wasn't just the way he responded, which I was really, really shocked. It was the way the women responded on his behalf that really unsettled and unnerved me. And I think once I realized that there were certain things that you're not allowed to say, that's really all I want to talk about.
So I want to just recap this. You're at a feminist leftist meeting. A man is there pretending to be a woman, and you say, "Are you a man?"
Online. It's online.
Okay.
And they all get they get mad at me.
They get mad at you for calling out the obvious. Okay. So things you're not allowed to say in the UK anymore. So what has your life been? What was that the starting point for you, where you said, this is crazy?
Yeah, I think before that, I'd sort of assumed that the word trans woman was reserved for transsexuals. And I had this idea that a transsexual was a deeply disturbed, timid person who found it difficult to go out in the world and was, just quite a, mentally ill person and deluded, but also harmless. And I had no idea that what trans woman meant was a man who literally wants to force everybody around him to cooperate in his fantasy or fetish that he is a woman. And once I found that was a thing, because it's just insane. Once I found that was a thing, it was something I really couldn't leave. And it got a lot worse very, very quickly. So I asked in lefty sort of women's groups, does my daughter have the right to go into a female-only changing room and not see an adult penis? And the answer to that, right, is of course she does. I mean, that's a bridge too far for anyone. But no, that's your daughter's transphobic. You've raised your daughter to be a pervert if she's concerned about genitals. and just why are you raising a family of bigots?
Oh
So
my
that
God.
was that was the response.
Tell me about the real straw that broke the camel's back for you, the billboard. What did you do in the UK that made everybody lose their ever-loving minds? Tell me, I mean, did you do a big billboard that said gays or transgenders are going to hell? Did you like put up a big picture of people having been mutilated after surgery? What did you do that caused such an outroar?
Well, I'll show you. I don't know if you need some sort of warning for your viewers.
Yes,
So
viewers, please.
I'm sorry if anyone's offended, but that's what I put. Let's see if I can get the light off that. That's what I put on the billboard.
Oh.
So it's the dictionary definition of woman. It may as well have said death to all trans women, because I think that the fundamental thing that's the most alarming about this, probably more than if I'd put death to trans women, is that this is a neutral, objective truth. And so that is far more threatening to the transgender ideology than if I'd said, let's kill all trans people, I think.
That's pretty incredible. I've watched the interviews that you've done with your morning talk shows over there, and the hostility that you face for implying that women may not be safe with men in their spaces. Tell me about that. Why is that why are they freaked out about that?
Well, I used to be a feminist, and so if I go back to those arguments, it's kind of a sexism that's a little bit deeper than a sexism. It's so for all of us, we are raised in a society and a culture, and actually our brains are wired from puberty onwards to have, I guess we might call it modesty, but there is an embarrassment factor to the way we feel about ourselves and our bodies from about it. You know, it's a global phenomenon. It's not just in some countries, and obviously that sort of level of nudity will depend on whatever culture, but it's not good enough for these men to dress like women. I think part of their whole identity actually requires them to make women feel uncomfortable. So it's about constantly breaking our boundaries. And I've got some other sinister ideas about why that is for part of the movement, that what mothers do, and also what women do, is we are the gatekeeper to children's safety. And so I think if you can undermine our protections, especially what you're doing with the sort of schools, and we've just had here that they're going to teach 6-year-olds about touching themselves. I mean, I'm smiling, but it does really make me feel quite. I mean, if somebody did that to my 6-year-old, I can't say that I'd be polite about that at all.
No.
But so the women's spaces, we don't actually have any laws, and I don't think you do in America, that a man's not allowed to go in a woman's toilet, but it's pretty much how society is arranged, that you don't go into women's toilets and changing rooms, you don't apply for women's bursaries, because you have like big money deals in America if you can get onto a scholarship for girls sports or whatever. Absolutely. You know, but it's just mad that you wouldn't have to put in the college bursary application for female sport that person actually has to be female, and what female means, because it's been a given that we all know that.
Absolutely. What do you think? So you said that you think that there's a stripping away of the identity of women because we're the gatekeepers to children. So are you implying that you think they're trying to do this in order to remove women out of the way? We're too busy being polite and trying to be welcoming to everyone and be nice so that they have easier access to our kids?
Well, I think that's part of it. Like, we had a really big thing over here in the 1970s, 80s and 90s where sort of liberal, in the sense of accepting liberals, I guess the normal sense of liberal, they got really coerced and manipulated into this notion that actually the only thing that was wrong with paedophilia was the shame that children felt. And so we had people trying to change the laws of consent. Now, what they were doing is they were on our BBC. I'm going to call them normal. I don't mean normal, but paedophiles kind of presenting as normal human beings, not disturbed, evil men. And they are mostly men. And they would sort of talk about kindness to children and how children have agency. And there's all these sort of words being used by trans lobby groups to try and, well, you have some terrible things that are going on with your children in transing. We don't quite have that because we do have, our healthcare is for a start, it's less money oriented because it's state funded. So we don't have hospitals, we don't have Olsen Kennedy giving 8-year-olds testosterone like you do in the States. You can't get a double mastectomy until you're 18, you know, and you can have it at 13. I think in Oregon you can do it 15 without your parents' consent. Yeah. So we don't have those sorts of things, but there's very similar language that was used to normalize and try and coerce the general public into accepting paedophilia. And that's the same sort of stuff as consent and agency and all these little words that you hear when we talk about mutilating children's bodies.
I want you to talk about that for a minute, because when it came to comprehensive sex education, which is a springboard into allowing all types of lifestyles, including pedophilia, I'm waiting for bestiality, I don't know what else is coming, polyamorous or whatever, where you've got multiple partners. Tell me about that word consent. What is it about saying free agency and consent where we're applying it to 8-year-olds? What is this? When I'm talking to superintendents and they're telling me, you don't think consent matters? And I'm thinking, we've always had no. People have always been able to say no. Why are they using these words, consent and free agency? What is this about?
I think the main reason they're using these words, if you're a manipulative paedophile and your main goal is to get to children, and you know, I've read some of the stuff that goes on in Hollywood. I've seen some quite disturbing videos of like Leonardo DiCaprio with an agent when he's about 16, and there's far too much sort of touching and lingering.
And that man was actually later prosecuted as a pedophile. He was prosecuted for molesting children. Yeah.
Who knew that a man that had far too much to do with teenage boys was going to turn out to be a child rapist? But if your goal, I mean, I talk about the Catholic Church, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on Catholics at all, but I'm saying that there were men that gave their lives apparently to God and spent their whole life in the priesthood just to have access to rape children. So if a man can do that, why can't loads of them get together in an organization to try and coerce society and get rid of some of our safeguardings? I think it's the very least they would do. And this language switch, so I talk about pronouns, I don't use preferred pronouns. If you're a man, you're a man, and you get he, and you don't mess with my language, it's none of your business how I speak. But you'll even get intellectuals like Douglas Murray over here, and these men that really understand the issues, that men cannot be women, that out of politeness will say she. And that slight switch, it's very difficult then to say, why is she using the women's toilets? Whereas if you stick to he for a man, you can very clearly say, why is he in the women's toilets? But they're just these tiny little changes of language. So consent, if we talk about agency and consent, and we've talked about that a lot, and I agree with the whole consent rules. I agree with the lack of capacity to consent. But that's it. That's where it ends for me. Children do have the lack of capacity to consent to body changes, to medicine, and to sex.
Tell me about you did a video, since we're kind of moving into children a little bit more, you did a video showing Dr. Wooberly. Am I saying it right? Dr. Wooberly. I was really shocked and appalled. I put that video up on America's Mom. I wanted everyone to see that because they need to understand what we are talking about when we are talking about children transitioning. Walk us through the process of a child who goes through the transition from being a born, let's just do a female to male. Walk us through that.
Female to male, I think, number one, the impetus and the motivations are very different. I think it's quite easy, it's quite difficult in our very sexualized society. If you don't want to join in, on the kind of pretty boy interested sexualized version of female, then the only way you can really escape that with being a lesser female is to transition to male, or rather one of the ways, unless you're very resilient, I think, and especially if you're a lesbian youth. So the first thing you do is you go along and you socially transition, and we know that once you socially transition, once you decide that your name is Robert instead of Rebecca, and you socially transition, then the likelihood of you moving on to a medical transition is extraordinarily high. So when these parents of 3 and 4-year-olds who are insane, and I think they've got Munchausen's by proxy, but that's another issue. When those parents take that child and socially transition them, they basically start them on the journey. Then you've got puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are said to be reversible. They are not. There is no data to say that they are reversible at all anywhere in the world, even with some of these very dodgy studies that have been done with lots of trans lobby money. They don't even have any long-term data that says it's reversible. So that's number one. Number two, you may breast bind. So if you've missed the boat and you've already got your breasts, then you breast bind. That can cause like cracked ribs, breathing difficulties. You can't do PE, like sports. You can't, on a hot day, you have to be careful. You can't, you sort of feel, well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think these mothers that go along with that, they should have to wear a binder for a week before they allow their daughter to wear one, because I don't think it matters whether you've got ample breasts or not. Anything doing that for an entire day, I think it would make most of us probably want to throw up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So then after you do, I didn't really need to do the visual, I guess, but
it's just you can feel this. You can, like. Yes, you can start to feel how this is so suffocating.
Yeah, it's insane. Then you have testosterone. Now in the United States, because your healthcare system, I think, is flooded with money and people wanting to make money out of it. And I'll just digress slightly. So Lupron, which is one of your main puberty blockers, was used in men with prostate cancer. And if you just Google prostate cancer Lupron scandal, Lupron, you will find men that died of heart failure before the prostate cancer killed them. Now, these will be men in their 70s and 80s, which basically they could just live with the prostate cancer until they die, because cancer grows very slowly in old men. And yet, I think there were some doctors, they made like $1.6 million kickbacks from drug companies to give Lupron where they knew it wasn't needed. So that's that. So we know that medical scandals happen. Mm-hmm. Testosterone, what that does is eventually, well, first of all, it gives them acne and it gives them vaginal atrophy, which is like the menopause. So deep inside you, everything just loses any moisture. This is too graphic, I'll stop.
No, tell it. People do not understand. It's one thing to be like, just be nice, leave them alone, when you're dealing with parents of these kids who are not understanding what is all involved. So no, please.
So vaginal atrophy will cause, so when the body reaches a high point, shall we say, if I'm being euphemistic, when the body reaches a high point, everything contracts and then it releases, right? That's what most women experience generally in that area. You're
so polite. So, you're talking about an orgasm. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm talking about an orgasm.
Yes.
So
okay.
It all contracts and then it releases. Well, when you have atrophy, it doesn't release. So you will have that intense contraction can be days. Now, the only way to escape that sort of agony is to have a hysterectomy. So these are women in their teens, they're going through the menopause. And in their early 20s, they're having to have hysterectomies. And a hysterectomy then increases your chance of osteoporosis, cancer, and now they've discovered Alzheimer's. So the earlier your menopause, your natural menopause, the more likely you have the greater risk of Alzheimer's. And if you do it earlier, because who knew? I mean, whether you're religious or whether you believe in evolution or somewhere in between, whatever happened to our bodies to make them like they work, it's very well done. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it took a millennia to craft and change, and you know, and I think most of us think our bodies work pretty well. I've grown 4 humans in mine.
They're amazing. Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
that's where we are really. We're taking, and for what? For a child to feel a little more comfortable, because there's this crazy social contagion, which there's a lady called Jennifer Bielek who's written for the Federalist. I think her surname is Bilek. And she's written Where the Money Is, and it's her belief, and I'm inclined to agree with her somewhat. Her belief is this is all about creating lifelong medical patients, because once you have that hysterectomy, you have to keep taking these hormones. You know, whichever way you go, then that's it. You're forever. You are hooked on these drugs to make you something that you'll never really be. Then, of course, you've got the other surgeries. So you've got the double mastectomy, which often doesn't even cure the dysphoria, because they can't cut the entire breast off, because then you'd have like a concave chest. So they leave some of the breast tissue, which still moves and still behaves like breast tissue. So that's one thing. So it doesn't really cure that anyway. And then the other thing is creating a pretend penis, where they move the flesh of the arm. They create a tubular prosthetic that doesn't really work. They sew it on. There are stories of like celebratory stories. So these aren't scary stories. These are, I feel so brave, with a lot of people going, oh my God, you're so brave. It's so wonderful. 30 corrective surgeries after having a phalloplasty. And one of the complications was she urinated through her anus and had a bag, and then had another.
And you will never ever hear this stuff on the main media, ever. I've never heard that.
No.
I've never heard this talked about before, ever. That is horrifying.
It's properly kind of who's the monster? It's proper Frankenstein stuff.
Yeah.
So so that's not uncommon to have these corrective surgeries. There are some surgeons that make a pretty penny out of corrective surgeries.
Wow.
You know, I think it costs $250,000 to go from male to female.
And you may have heard in our military, we had the Trump administration had said no more transgenders in the military. Why? A lot of it was cost and expense. We are paying for the surgeries. We're paying for the hormone treatment. We're paying for the ongoing need, as you stated, ongoing need for those medications and hormones. And that's not fair to the taxpayers. There's a lot of responsibility and obligation that comes with that. It's not a they're less human thing. This is a massive, exorbitant cost to maintain your hormones.
They're practically disabled. The men that have their penis inverted, what happens with the girls with the phalloplasty is they often get necrosis. So their flesh dies, and then they have to have another skin graft. So they'll replace the arm flesh with the square from like a 6-inch square from the thigh. Often both of those things fail. And so then they have another surgery and another surgery to try and,
create something.
We can't do these things. What made anybody think that we can genuinely change a man into a woman? It's ridiculous. I don't believe that any surgeon genuinely believes they can do it. I just think they just see dollars. Absolutely.
And keep going. So one of the things, besides the obvious parts of women being at risk with men being in their spaces, I've watched several lesbian women talk about this, how, their spaces are being invaded. I didn't expect that. Why is it, do you think, that a lot of people in the LGBTQ community are believing that they need to accept transgender as a viable lifestyle? Why are they doing that? It's been assumed that they're just a part of the group, even though we know it's gender dysphoria. The Johns Hopkins University, they were the first to create the sex change operation. They no longer do the sex change operation because they found after 20 years of research, it does nothing to heal that person. And you know, their motto is do no harm. So if they have the same suicide rate and in fact have worse depression afterwards, they have said, we're not going to continue to do this. So what do you think the obligation is there to unite gender dysphoria with them?
I think they've been co-opted. So I think the first transsexuals, the first men, were probably really effeminate homosexual men. And I think that that's how they got enveloped and cushioned in. It wasn't heterosexual men, which it predominantly is now. It's men in dresses who get a kick out of wearing a dress and forcing their wives, who we call trans widows, into this lie.
We are going to talk about that.
So I think that they've occupied these spaces long before they turned into tyrants. And I think it's been I think there's a guy called Matthew Paris in the UK who was a gay rights campaigner who admits that what they did is they would get together and they would decide to infiltrate. And I'm going to say something that's not linked, but with the paedophile information exchange, when they wanted to change our society, what they did is they got themselves into positions of influence. So that's why every time you think, well, Planned Parenthood, they won't, although I think that's such a dodgy organization, I can't tell you, and I'm pro-choice. But what's happened is that they've now got people on the board and any voices of dissent just get kicked out. So then you can't. So there's a big swell of lesbians have been talking about this for a lot longer than gay men. Gay men are just about cottoning onto it now. Because why do gay men care who don't have families? Why do they care predominantly about women and girls? They don't care. They don't care about us. And it's only women and girls. Like, who cares about us?
Wow.
So I think Magdalene Burns is a lesbian who passed away actually last week of a brain tumor. It was terrible. She was 36. But she's got some really good videos which talk about how this has happened. So most lesbian groups, the women don't have lesbian bars anymore because these men just used to go in, because the greatest validation for a heterosexual man to say he's a woman is to force a lesbian to say that he's a woman and have him as a sexual partner. I mean, it's just, I think that the backlash is coming, but there's a lot of young people, young lesbians even, that think part of their sexuality has to be to accept someone with a penis.
Yeah. I've had a lot of messages about that recently because we've been reading these children's books that are trying to link all of these groups together. And my thought with that is it's just a matter of time before pedophilia is right there in with them. They're already been trying. We already know that. I can't agree more with your idea that if they can remove the gatekeepers. I haven't heard it said quite that way, though. This is so fascinating. As we here in America, we'll hear these stories of living your truth, and you've got a man that comes out as a transgender woman and leaves his wife and his children. I had not heard this side of things before. I think everyone will find this very fascinating. There is just a wake of heartache and disaster that follows a transgender person. And whether they're legitimate or doing what you're talking about, where they're just getting a kick out of acting like they might be female, but really this is kind of a bizarre fetish. But tell me about tell our audience about this trans women widowhood. I had never heard this.
Okay.
And we don't talk about this stuff in America. It's only live your dream, follow your desires.
I know, it's so insane. Oh, you're born in the wrong body, as if that is a possibility. If you're religious, how could you possibly believe God made such a mistake? And if you're not religious, how can you believe in something with no evidence whatsoever? But what happens is these men, when they get to a certain age, and goodness knows, I wish they could afford a Porsche instead. But I think they've watched too much porn, basically. And what a lot of these men want is they don't want to change their bodies. They don't have dysphoria. They don't have that at all. In fact, I'm I think probably maybe 1% of the trans community may have something like dysphoria, but I don't really believe it. So you have these men that decide that they want breasts. They don't want to lose their penis. They just want a breast or two, probably two. So they fall in love with themselves as women. That's what happens to them. So you'll hear these very common stories of these men taking lots of selfies of themselves in their new gear, of bankrupting the family, spending so much money on wigs, not wanting to be intimate with their wives anymore. Although, to be frank, if my husband even hinted at anything like this, he'd be out of the door quicker than he could find a wig. It just,
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. Like, stop tolerating this nonsense, women. Stop.
Oh.
Stop.
Well, if he's still, the thing is, I love my children unconditionally, but I love my husband in a very conditional manner. You know, it's a proper, I fell in love with him for a whatever reason, and if those reasons cease to exist, no, I won't love him anymore. I've got far too much self-respect, and I'm not a bystander in my husband's life. I'm his wife.
Yes.
You know, we have a partnership. Oh, and I can't think of anything more revolting. Plus, he's quite a blokey bloke. He's quite a masculine man. He would look hideous as a woman.
He wouldn't make a good girl, is what you're saying.
Oh my God, he just looked so awful. So that's what happens. And I think that this is, we've got a new thing in this country called coercive control, where men basically gaslight their wives, and their wives have very little control in their lives. And I think that it's obscene abuse to make your wife pretend 24 hours a day that she thinks you're female. I think it's quite a revolting abuse. And I also think that these men, and it's predominantly men, you don't hear heterosexual women suddenly wanting to remove their breasts and be called Brian. You know, it does happen, but I think it's extraordinarily rare. And I think it's happened to a boy who transitioned in the US, that his mother did it. And I think she was just quite, he was the youngest of, there were 3 girls, I think, and then him. So I think that was something to do with the boy getting changed. And he was wearing makeup and sort of dressing like a 30-year-old woman when he was 11. And I think his mother quite liked the attention of all that. And that's how I think she got into thinking that maybe she was a boy after all, after being like a stay-at-home mum with long hair and very feminine. So you don't have women doing it. And I just think that for these men, it's just this ultimate fetish. And I would say to any woman, even if what you want to do is you want to support your husband and you have no self-respect or self-esteem left, and you think that your marriage can cope with it, for God's sake, protect your finances. Just protect them. Even if he never leaves or you never leave him, know your rights, know where your bills are paid, know what your finances are, know whether your name's on the mortgage. Just do everything you can to protect your assets, because as far as I'm concerned, the first time he tells you that he wants to be dressing as a woman, he's probably been doing it for 10 years behind your back. And then it will be a really short time before you become an invisible player in your marriage. And it would just all be about him. And it's absolutely dreadful. And these women then feel that they have to constantly affirm their husband as women. And it's very frightening. I just think, just tie up, kick him out, get rid, take everything he's got. It would be my advice.
I find it amazing. I had not heard about trans women widows before, or even had considered that devastation that is happening all around. So I want to honor your time. You have been so amazing with me today. I want to take us back to kids for just a minute, and what you guys are viewing over there in the UK, what you're watching happen here in America. What do you think about this push to have little drag boys dressed in drag dancing on stages for grown men, mothers going along with this and acting like, you know, it's just part of their artisticness and their personality, and they're just letting their personality out there. How do you guys look at America in light of this situation, this transgender weird sexualization of kids that we are literally fostering. We're paying our tax dollars now through comprehensive sex ed to sexualize our kids. What do you guys think about that when you're looking at America?
Well, I'd like to say that I look at you from this moral high ground that the UK has, but we don't, because we're doing the same. But you're a little bit further on. I think you're far more spread out, so any of your pushback is a lot more difficult. And I think that just very quickly, I think what you need to do as US women is, and the women on the right do this very good, they do it well, to stick to an issue, whereas women on the left like everybody to agree with everything they've ever uttered before they'll work together. But this has to be pushed aside. You have to unite as women, and you have to not use a religious exemption, but you have to contact your senators and your representatives, and you have to oppose the Equality Act. And not the whole thing. You have to tell your senators that actually what you need to do is you just need to take out the gender identity. It's never going to work if you try and oppose lesbians and gays not being, and I don't know in what space or what grounds anyone would want to do this anyway. I don't think a man should make a cake saying I love gay marriage, by the way. I think that's a freedom of expression issue. But when it comes to, you have to oppose it on the basis of the law won't make sense, because if anyone can be a woman, then woman ceases to exist in law, and you have to stick to that. Just that gender identity thing is really, really important. When it comes to kids in the United States, I think I don't know how you're going to push back this tide. I think it's paedophilia. I think it's a lot of, and it's mums that go along with it. It's dads that ruin their families by pretending to be women, but it's mothers that go along with the mutilation of their own children. And I have no idea why women do that. I think maybe they're over empathetic with their children and they listen to their kids far too much. I'm my child's parent. I don't need to be their friends. They've got friends. If they want someone to validate and tell them that everything they say is right, then they can find a girlfriend or a boyfriend to do that. That's not my place. My place is to think about my children and how they're going to feel in 5 and 10 and 15 years time, and treat them like a work in progress, not that they have any idea in what they're doing. The drag queen thing, there's some really good pushback with the drag queens, and what they've done is they've made it so what they do is they protest wherever the drag queen story time nonsense is, and they protest and they make it too difficult for the libraries to actually put on that event. So that's a really good method. You only need about 5-10 people to go and say, we're not having this drag queen reading to our small children in a library that's a public place. And also what you have in America is you have free access to meeting rooms in your library, and they're not allowed to refuse you because it's a state-funded building and they have to uphold free speech and the freedom of expression. So that is a really good place to try and have meetings. And the library, because it's a state building, they have to protect you in there. So you don't have to sort of get security. But when you protest a library to stop drag queen story time, you'll get a lot of the trans activists coming to protest you, and then the library don't want anything to do with it because it's far too much hassle. So that's quite a good way of doing that. As for drag queen story, the drag kids, I think these are just women who have achieved nothing in their lives and are trying to get some sort of validation that they're not nothing by pushing their kids forward. And I think they're abusers, fundamentally. Anyone that takes their child to pose with a nude adult male or in a gay adult club to have money thrown at them, anyone that doesn't see that as abuse is probably a little bit dodgy. And any woman that's doing that to her children probably shouldn't have had them.
I love you. You speak the truth. You tell the truth. It's costing you a lot. What's your situation like right now? I saw that your children have been doxxed.
Yeah. I've been interviewed twice by the police. both times at the behest of Mermaid's Gender. And what Mermaids did is they reported me to the police. The police accessed my data via Twitter. This was when we still had jihadis on Twitter that the police didn't touch.
They didn't touch.
But no, they didn't. It's and then they phoned me. I had to go to be interviewed under caution twice. I just got a death threat this evening. That was, but I think it's just a nonsense one. But it was someone saying that there should be a contract out on my life.
Yes.
But I'm not stopping, and I live down a long driveway, and I've often thought if somebody came to my house, I would kill them. You know, if anybody literally came to threaten my family, I don't think you could stop me for. It would have to be utensils because we don't have guns. It would have to be.
Well, I was going to say, girl, that's why we have the second here. I wish you guys had the second, but you don't. And you're right. You have the right to defend your family. And I just want to wrap this up. Tell American moms, what do American moms need to do? I mean, you are in a much more refined environment. You have far more restrictions than we do here in America. Tell American moms what they need to do for their kids to protect them.
Well, two things. You need to go to your school board meetings. Because anytime there's a little bit of pushback, I understand that trans activists get together. So I watched a hearing where a 12-year-old girl said, I want to be able to go in a girl's changing room without a male. And a 16 or 17-year-old boy who said he was a girl also testified, and he won. So you need to be at your school board meetings. If you're in Washington, you have direct access to your representatives. You can go in to the what is it, or the massive building.
Our Congress.
Yeah, you can go in and you can have a 5-minute pitch at anybody in that entire building. So that's something you need to do. There are organizations, there's Hands Across the Aisle, and which is a non-partisan group, and there's also a more of a left-wing feminist group called WOLF, the Women's Liberation Front. They are both working on your behalf. The Women's Liberation Front are just about to try and test what the word woman means in law, with a case about a funeral parlor that didn't want a man that said he was a woman working there. Because what do grieving relatives want? Not a man in a dress when they're just about to talk about burying one of their loved ones. It's insane. So what they're going to do is what the trans activists have been doing, which is you take a small piece of law and you implant a solid bit of legislation in it so the trans activists have changed the word gender and gender identity. They've slipped it into loads of your bills now. So if you have a critical mass where it's said so many times that gender identity is in place of sex, then that becomes an easy precedent for them to use in the future. So go to your school board meetings, support the women like yourself who are doing something about it. Don't take no for an answer. Do protest outside your school gates. Make it difficult for anybody that's trying to take your children's rights away. Support Save Women's Sports or Save Our Sports. She's doing some fabulous work, and she's representing some of the athletes, like the female athletes that have lost out to these boys pretending to be girls.
Lost out on college scholarships. I mean, it's insane. They're losing their scholarships to obvious boys who couldn't compete in the boys' world.
Yeah.
I just, you know, listening to you, I was so relieved. I was like, okay, all sanity has not been lost. There is reason still. And I think one of the things I love about you also is that you're, like you said, you're not coming from a moral position. You're coming from, this is just the facts of our existence. We have men and women, and that's that. And I just can't tell you.
Say, I think you need to, to be really honest, I think Americans, you need to up your game. I think you've tried, I mean, you have a really thriving abortion debate in America. And the reason you have that thriving abortion debate is because people feel strongly enough about it to get out on the streets and to use graphic imagery and to be really, really active about it. The same as when your gun laws, like we don't understand gun ownership in the UK. We live right next door to each other for a start. And we've had tyrannical governments, I'm sure, but it's not the same. And we don't have the history of gun ownership. So we don't understand your gun ownership stuff. I'm beginning to.
When you come here, we'll take you out. We'll take you out.
But there's also the Kelsey Coalition. They are amazing. They're a group of many of those women have lost their children to this cult, and I met them at the Heritage Foundation, and they gave a talk. In fact, there's a Heritage Foundation talk soon. I recently protested outside of Stonewall, which is like our version of HRC. It's basically supposed to be a lesbian gay rights movement that's been totally taken over by trans. And what we did is we stood outside with 1.5 meters, so sort of 5 feet, 6 feet high pictures of the phalloplasty, what it does to the arm, of a double mastectomy. Often they don't have nipples when they have their double mastectomy, because the nipple often dies when you do any sort of breast work. So we stood outside with those pictures. I don't see why Americans wouldn't be stood outside of the hospitals that are doing the double mastectomies on teens with massive placards, take out some billboards, do whatever it takes to make sure that the people that are objecting, and there will be millions across America that think this is insane, but they don't know that there are millions across America who think this is insane. So I've had letters from someone in the middle of America who's like, I feel I'm losing my entire mind. There's nobody I know who thinks this is nonsense. So that's what I would do. Or go to a school board meeting with these placards, just up your game, make the press, make it impossible for the press to ignore you. Support Madeleine Kearns at the Cairns at the National Review. She's doing some incredible work. And Trump, I think, wherever you are on the political scale, I think Americans should know, if Hillary had got in, you'd be so screwed by now. That the gender stuff. But the gender
You're
stuff,
so right. Oh my goodness. Do you all hear her? This is not me saying this. This is her, former feminist liberal woman from the UK, saying we would be screwed right now if HRC was our president. And it's exactly, you're getting so much love right now. We all know it's true. We all know it's true. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Fiscal policies. I'm not going to go into any of the other stuff, but
yeah,
I think Trump listened to somebody, right? He listened to someone about the trans in the military. Now, who it is that he was listening to, I don't know, but some of you must have access to whoever had his ear. That's what you need. You need to work out who has his ear. He would only need to say 2 sentences about this whole thing, and the whole situation changes for America. So you need more on Fox News. What, doesn't he watch Fox and Friends?
Yep.
You need a little bit more on that. Everybody needs to be writing to Tucker Carlson every week, who's doing some great work on this, and he always speaks his mind and has people on. Stephen Crowder, he speaks out about this, and even Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin. So all of these people are talking about it, but you need the New York Times to talk about it. You need these lefty morons to start talking about it. And the narratives need to change from the schools. You need to get those books out of the schools. But I think now you've lost so much ground that without some really quite big action and push, I don't know how America's going to do it. And everybody, and I'm speaking to left-wing Americans, you need to just remember that the woman next to you, whatever her views on anything else, first and foremost, before the politics, she's a woman. And that's it. That's all you need to know.
Thank you so much. You are so brilliant. You're so beautiful, and you are just spot on. Thank you for putting yourself out there. And, God bless you and protect your family as you continue to fight for the reality that only women can be women. Thank you so much, Posie. You are absolutely a gem. Everybody go follow her, find her on YouTube. She's got a new show starting, a new podcast starting. You're going to want to be on there all the time. Nobody can talk. Don't you just, I want to listen to you all the day because your voice is just so lovely. I want to go talk with an accent after I'm done hearing from you. So thank you so much for your time and for your sincerity in all of this. You're not paid to do this. You're not a paid lobbyist. You're not making millions on this, are you, that we're unaware of? And if you were, good for you.
No.
I hope you will. I hope you'll be able to profit from re-educating people on foundational truths. So good for you.
Let's hope so. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, friends.
Great,
We'll talk to you soon. We'll have you back on soon. Thank you.
Cheers.
Wow. Totally mind blown. We're going to upload this video to YouTube. Share. There are many parents who are beginning this process
into making something out of nothing, and they need to understand what they are in for, what their children are in for. That was incredible. We'll have some highlights after today. Thank you guys all for being patient with us, and go find her, Posie Parker, women and child activists. Remember what she said, women are the gatekeepers to the children, and if they can remove us women from protecting our children and invite other people in, which is exactly what we're watching happen in real time. So protect our kids, guys. Have a great rest of your day.